Good morning, everybody. Welcome back. We are in our second session of day 17. Welcome if this is your first session for the day. If you are coming back after Michelle Behari's fabulous session this morning, welcome back as well. We are joined this morning by the wonderful Temre Green, PhD. She has a background spanning organisational psychology, management consulting, and general management. She's designed and led large-scale organizational changes and facilitated the adoption of technology platforms, products, services, and more. She's got a growing fascination and passion for the future of work carried out of the corporate space and into the startup world, where she's led the growth of web-based platforms. She's recognized as one of Westpac's bank's women of influence. Temre is known as a mentor, thought leader, community leader, and supporter of diversity. She's from California, she lives in Australia, and Temre, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and I can't wait to hear where we're going on landmark growth.
Thanks so much. Good morning, everyone. I appreciate your introduction. Thank you, Julia. A very warm welcome to Cynthia, Heidi, Wayne, Lonnie, those of you who've dialed in, and those of you who are watching the recording. I'm really pleased to be speaking at VID21, and thanks, Julia, for all of your efforts in organizing and hosting this event, as well as inviting me and many others to speak on shaping the future. Building on what Julia shared from my background in psychology and consulting and transformation and growth, today I'm going to be talking about growth as a form of change, specifically as it relates to rewiring a business for the future of work. Since we do have a nice intimate group today, I'm more than happy to tailor my content a bit to shape your experience and background. And to get started, I would like to hear a little bit more about you. So if you wouldn't mind either unmuting or just using the chat feature, that's perfectly fine. Could you let me know a little bit more about what you do? Do you happen to be in the field of organizational change and transformation? Is that where you're working? Or are you specializing in a different area or field? So go ahead and pop that into the chat for me, please. Yep, similar field. Okay, thank you, Wayne. Let others jump in. Yep, same. Okay, great. Appreciate that. Some of you might be listening in. Leadership training in the seafood industry, but in the same. Yep, okay, great. Sure. In innovation, change, agile, lean, and design thinking. So very similar. Wonderful. I appreciate everyone jumping in on that. I think then that you'll be familiar with one of the very big and topical areas of organizational change and transformation then, which is, of course, the future of work. Personally, I really do want to see the business community succeed in their endeavors in this space. I mean, it's a huge investment and commitment in time and money, which can be daunting when research regularly points to 70% of change and transformation programs failing. Now, what that research doesn't say is that these projects didn't just miraculously fail at launch or at go live. Personally, I don't think the project manager or change manager just dropped the ball at the last minute. I believe that there are markers along the way in this kind of transformation, then in those cases were either missed, ignored, or done incorrectly, and that's what resulted in the failure. I refer to these markers as landmarks. Why landmarks? Well, a landmark is defined as a significant juncture, event, or achievement. It's also a stage of development. And that's what we're talking about here. You know, those junctures that are important to business development and growth. Hence, I call this landmark growth. And there are 11 landmarks that I'm going to take you through today. Now, within the big picture realm of the future of work, a pretty large portion of businesses are heavily focused on remote work, operating in a dispersed team, and hybrid work models right now. But the future of work is also defined by the integration and use of artificial intelligence and automation, as well as new workforce structures. So in its basic form, artificial intelligence is a program that can sense, reason, and adapt, and it can do that with or without human intervention. There are different types of artificial intelligence that have different use cases and business applications. One of the promising areas, though, to apply artificial intelligence is in customer data. So I'll reference examples from both the hybrid work models and artificial intelligence, specifically customer data, across the landmarks. Of course, I'll check in with you throughout our time together as well. Okay, so let's get into the 11 growth landmarks. I'm going to turn my camera over to my whiteboard for a moment. The first landmark, let me get this going. First landmark is to harness data assets. And the question that you want to be asking yourself here, I love it when you got to type right for the first time. The questions that you want to be asking yourself in this first landmark is, do you have data, or do you need to collect data? So if you have it, was your data of high quality, or did it not meet some basic quality standards? So data is the evidence and catalyst for change. In the context of the future of work, with respect to using artificial intelligence, a common data set would be customer churn or customer attrition rates. So this data would need to be appropriately labeled, free from bias, current, and clean in the way, in terms of the way that it was collected. In the context of our other example, in a dispersed workforce, this can include quantitative data from employee sentiment surveys about remote and hybrid work practices, but it could also include your login data that indicates the locations where people are working from or the times in which they were active. You would want to apply your appropriate and transparent survey data collection methods to ensure that you had valuable data. And by the way, data can also include other organizational diagnostic tools related to the business and its people. But the key here is that collecting and applying data is the much needed first step. The second landmark is to understand the problem. And the questions that you want to be asking yourself here are, do you understand the problem fully and correctly? But also, have you gone deeper than just the surface level? So it's important to be clear on what you're trying to optimize. And if you're planning to use machine learning, then it's very important to be clear on what you're trying to predict. So if we take our customer churn data example, you may want to predict the exact point in time when customers stop using your service so that you can intervene and retain them. Your data scientist would help to determine the appropriate algorithm to do that. But if you're looking at a remote work example, let's say you have data that shows your people don't want to come into the office every day. So in that case, you'd want to be clear about whether or not you're trying to optimize the at-home work experience, or perhaps it's something more along the lines of supporting connectivity across those dispersed teams. Understanding the problem you want to solve is critical because it determines what you do and how you're going to go about solving it. Okay, the third is to check the external landscape. And the questions that you want to be asking yourself here is what's happening in the external landscape? So that includes the changing market, competitors, or what will likely happen in your industry over time. So picking up from that previous landmark, this is all about preparing your response to the identified problem. With regard to customer churn data, in our artificial intelligence example, you would hypothesize about what is happening in the market or across your industry. You might look at how competitors are serving customers faster and therefore retaining their customers. You might just have a market-leading vision compared to the external landscape or market. If you're looking at the remote work and in your industry in that space, you might want to be thinking about how you recruit and your flexible work offering. Or perhaps you want to be an employer of choice over your other competitors. Either way, this is the landmark that helps you design for your future placement of your business in the market. I'll just jump back to the whiteboard for a moment. I group these first three into data collection and analysis. Okay, great. And for those of you who are just listening in on this and not necessarily watching live, I'll just say I am using a little whiteboard here. That's why I'm pausing momentarily. Yeah, so I'd like to check in with you then using the chat feature once again in relation to these first three in data collection and analysis. And based off of your experience in the work that you're currently, you said, doing in organizational change and transformation, how much weight would you put on these first 3 points? How important do you think they are? And I'll give you a moment and just pause while you pop that into the chat. Okay, so how important are these first three? Yep, they help you understand your adoption measures. Great. Very important. I agree, Julia. Thank you. The amount of transformation I've seen, yeah, solving the problem. Yeah, I've seen that as well. Another comment, super important. Thank you. We get insufficient time and consideration, absolutely. And Lonnie, the most important, to stop you solving the wrong problem and enable growth. And it provides, yeah, the foundation and the base. So really important. Thank you, everyone, for jumping in there. Yeah, so these first 3 points I have found to be the foundation, really, for transformation. I weigh these quite heavily. And from the projects that I have seen not achieve their intended results or adoption targets, they were definitely missing something quite big here. Okay, so we'll move on to number 4. Okay, and the fourth landmark is to define behaviors, then the solution. And the questions that you want to be asking here are, do you know what you expect from your people? Did you define the behaviors that you want first and then design the right solution, or then select the right off-the-shelf solution? It's more effective to think about the behaviors and expectations that you have for employees first, meaning that there is a strategy, a purpose, and design behind those actions. And then the technology is an enabler. Too often, I think it's the other way around. There are a few basic examples of this with regard to remote work. Organizations selected off-the-shelf products such as Zoom or Teams or WebEx that didn't necessarily create the ground rules for virtual facilitation and collaboration. The behaviors that they wanted to see in those meetings. So they haven't necessarily been as effective as they might like. Another is that some organizations are looking to put in place productivity tracking as part of remote work. So they would incorporate that software, but they haven't yet defined exactly what they want to see. And as a result, they're going to end up just monitoring people, right? So behaviors first. With regard to artificial intelligence, using that customer attrition example, you actually can kind of select off-the-shelf algorithms on KNIME, but you're not going to select the machine learning algorithm without understanding what customer behaviors you want to see or understand. So really important to define the behaviors and actions before the solution. Going on to the fifth landmark, and that is to incorporate users. And that includes their experience and history. And the questions that you want to be asking yourself there are, how well do you know your users? Did you consider the users at the start of the design and planning process? Or did you actually just think they're going to adopt it at launch? It's important to note also any history around this problem that you're solving. So for example, is it the fourth time that the company has tried to solve this problem? Because you're going to want to consider what those fatigue levels are. So in the areas of the future of work that I'm talking about, the important point is to involve the end user, whether that's an employee adopting your new work practices, or if it's a customer who is using your new and improved services. Just back to this whiteboard here, and I group these two landmarks together under the heading of design. Okay. So again, I just want to ask you to take a moment and turn to the chat feature, please. And let me know if, in your experience, if you think that this design element of a project needs to include behaviors and people, and why. I know that's a bit of a lot, so I'll give everyone just a little bit of extra time here. So do you think these types of projects should include behaviors and people, and why? Yes, otherwise you are just guessing. Exactly, Wayne. Good. Need both, or you miss a big piece of the puzzle. Thank you. Otherwise it's not fit for purpose. And yes, because it helps shape the solution. Great comments there. Thank you. And it's an interesting one. I obviously absolutely support including these in advance, but it's funny. I've seen relatively effective programs, around change and transformation that did not do this well. And what happened was, when they went time to launch, there was just a huge push required at the end, particularly from leadership and sponsorship. So, a lot of force. And by force, what I mean is they just had to really drive the outcomes. And it wasn't necessarily natural or easy. And to your comments and to what you're saying there, it didn't quite fit in the puzzle. It wasn't quite fit for purpose. It didn't really suit the needs of the user. So there was this, real big drive to get those results, which I'm sure, maybe when they're marking the success, they considered it effective, but not exactly an easy way to launch an effective solution. Okay. Jumping into the next one. Okay, the sixth. Oh, sorry, go back to my blue pen here. And that is that the sponsor is active. And the questions that you want to be asking yourself here is, first off, do you have one person in an executive or leadership role taking responsibility for the program? Truly sponsoring not only the program, but its benefits as well. As you would have seen from your own experience, the future of work needs a lot from its leaders. In particular, it takes vision, or at least an open mind, but hopefully a vision for how that company will operate. Whether it's a new hybrid model, or how that business will better serve its customers and reduce churn or attrition. A leader needs to really actively own and rally and champion for this change. It's a great time to take risks, experiment, to learn, but without that effective sponsorship and active sponsorship, change isn't likely to happen, especially when we're talking about something on such a big scale like the future of work. The seventh, and this has come up a little bit in the comments as well, which is that the success is defined. And the questions that you want to be asking here, of course, are, do you know what you're working towards and what you'll deem a success? But also just add to that, that you also want to define, success and failure, but with clear delineation between points in time. So that could be between milestones versus the actual go live versus what are your adoption targets versus your benefits realization. Because I see all of those as a little bit different. And those are different reasonable points in time to measure success, but there are different metrics to do that. So for example, milestone metrics like launching the hybrid workspace or kicking off the machine learning modeling process are great. But doing it isn't the ultimate success, of course. Seeing all employees accept new work practices is great, but what was the success metric for the long-term benefit that will be measured and when? Are you checking to see if they have their health and well-being 3 months down the road, 6 months down the road? So detailed and clear success metrics are important. They should come, I think they should come from the sponsor in the form of that broader benefit or vision for the company, and then be narrowed down to specifics, probably by a project team, which we'll talk about in a moment. Okay, so then I group these two landmarks together in what I call ownership. Okay. All right, I'll jump into the next landmarks here. So the next landmark, I guess I can go right back to my whiteboard, I call talent. And in fact, it's really talent and environment. But what I want to think about here is, are you forming the best and most comprehensive team, maybe they're a transformation team, that can operate in a psychologically safe environment? This is my way of saying, did you focus on people as much as you did on selecting the technology or the solution? Yeah, so I call out psychological safety here with talent because I see the transition into the future of work as one that requires challenging the status quo, not necessarily accepting the current state and taking risks and experimenting. So the people leading this need to question the algorithms for bias. They need to question why we would replicate current work practices in a hybrid environment rather than redefining those work practices. So talent that is not vocal nor heard in a safe environment isn't going to effectively serve or solve the problem. Okay, the ninth landmark I call methods and processes. Scoot that up a little bit. What you want to be asking yourself here is, do you operate within an agreed methodology? And are you allowing for agile work practices in case the project needs to change course based off of new information? With regard to artificial intelligence initiatives, you would want to follow agile methodology. Just as an aside, you've got your developers, data scientists, engineers, product managers, business users, etc. who all play a role in the DevOps and DataOps cycle to enable your cross-functional collaboration. I would definitely suggest following an agile methodology. It's the same as artificial intelligence, but using that agile methodology for cross-functional collaboration in designing and developing and executing your new work practices. What that might look like is you would want to include property and legal and industrial relations, governance, health and safety, human resources, project leaders, executive leaders, and many other advisors to all be collaborating on the new design of your work practices and hopefully within a proven methodology. So I group these two landmarks together as well, and I call them team. Okay, so I'll check in with you again on the last 4 together, which I've called ownership and team. So that covered the sponsor, success metrics, talent, and methods and processes. And ask you to use the chat feature and tell me where you have seen the biggest downfall or pitfall between those 4 in the transformation programs that you've worked on. In fact, if it helps, I can pop them back up here. So in the chat, where do you tend to see the biggest downfall across those 4? And while you're typing that in, I'll just respond to a question from Wayne. Under ownership, Wayne has asked, is there benefit in broadening that ownership to those involved in the change process to obtain greater buy-in? Thanks, Wayne. I think that's a fantastic point. Absolutely. While I was calling out the one individual person, I absolutely support seeing the change owned by everyone involved. And yes, and you've put in buy-in there, and I actually do like to see not only buy-in, but really that ownership and support. So thank you, Wayne. Okay, and the comments to the last question were lack of sponsorship. So I'll put my camera back on. Yep, lack of sponsorship, sponsor and talent, flexibility and agility. Yes. Success is defined but not tracked. And the sponsor is not actively supporting. Yeah, it's a lot on the sponsor. And I think there's some, ProSci puts out a lot of research every couple of years that shows that the sponsor is still one of the key success factors in a major transformation. You know, it's interesting because what I've seen too is where they usually get it wrong is in success. And they start to get it wrong from the point of having a business case. But they also tend to measure one point in time and not necessarily appreciating that success has those different points and the different metrics that you might apply at those different points. All right, great. Thank you everyone for jumping in on that one. Okay, jump into the 10th one here. And that's change capability. And the questions that you want to be asking in this landmark change capability is, do you have a way or a plan to support and grow the change capability across the organization? So that's all the way through to you know, the learning and the training and the development, all that, but also really how will you instill a growth mindset? In a way, this is really quite a big landmark in terms of achieving those long-term benefits and making a sustainable and long-lasting transition into the future of work. So there's a few things that I want to talk about here. The first is new roles. You know, you want accountable leadership and alignment. That's really required. And some of those new roles may include a chief artificial intelligence officer or a chief data officer, as well as a head of remote work. The second point to bring up is around upskilling. Particularly if you find yourself in a position where you're replacing roles with automation, you can build new capabilities to support people in the transition into the future of work. And the third is around learning and development, but I'm not referring to that technical upskilling. I'm talking about learning and development more as it's related to your own self-awareness, your well-being, connectivity, mindset, and overall health, as those will also be very important in the future. So those elements and more can make up change capability that I'm talking about. It's truly about building in sustainability and the ongoing ability to change as the elements of the future of work change and are shaped, truly shaped by our global experiences. The final and 11th landmark is integration. And the question that you want, or questions that you want to be asking yourself here are, do all new processes cross over silos to enable a seamless experience for the user? Are, for example, are all touch points along the customer journey and the lines of business considered? So, this transformation to the future of work isn't an exercise that can be done in one department or business unit and not another. I'm not saying you can't test things in smaller areas, but the transition into the future of work needs to be across all areas of a business and not siloed. So when it comes to a strategy for integrating artificial intelligence and or pairing it with human intelligence and the skills in your business, that strategy needs to be end-to-end across the business. Similarly, if you're introducing new work practices, they need to be applicable and enabled across all lines of business. Now, of course, what that looks like can depend on what your business does and who it serves, but the key there is to think about end-to-end integration. And I put these two final landmarks under the heading of experience. So what I'll do, I'm happy to, I'll share the 11 growth landmarks once again. And in fact, I have a PDF version of it that I can attach to the chat for everyone. And while I pull that up, I'll let you think about if you might like to ask a question, whether it's about one of the landmarks or more broadly about the future of work, or you're certainly more than welcome to ask me more philosophical question about the direction of the future and try to stump me, no worries. I'll let you decide the direction you want to take the conversation and open it up to all of you on the call while I put up this final image here. Get it up here for you. And that is what I will also share with you in a PDF in the chat. I can. So feel free, I don't mind if you prefer to just to speak or use the chat, go right ahead. And while that's happening, I'm just going to go into my Google Drive to attach this for you. How do you encourage a sponsor to be more active? So by the way, I think this is one of the great ironies of running these kinds of transformations. I love this. Thank you for the question, Josie. You'd think that the sponsor who truly wants to see this succeed would also be active in getting there. And in fact, you often have to provide a lot of direction to the sponsor, particularly because it's not their area of expertise, whether it might not be organizational behavior that's their area of expertise. So how do I encourage a sponsor to be more active? I first do talk about that big vision and the overall benefits, and so that we continue to go back to the direction that we're trying to take. I talk a lot about trust with a sponsor. I will say to that individual, I want to form that relationship where what I'm suggesting as an advisor to transition into the future of work is understood and appreciated and is ultimately going to get that business to where it's trying to go. I also look, just to be very, very practical about it, I do a lot of that work for the sponsor. I really try to take the effort and time out of it, because it's usually somebody in an executive role who doesn't necessarily, look, they'll make the time, don't get me wrong, but they may not want to use that time to go through multiple iterations. Sorry, am I back on the screen there? Yeah. So I think if there's anything else I want to add to how else I might encourage a sponsor to be active. Oh, quick wins. That's another good one. Right after a sponsor's active, we always see a spike in certain behaviors, or particularly if there's a carrot and stick type of scenario that comes out of how that sponsor was active, and that's always very encouraging. I use testimonials from users as well. Anything I can throughout the process to feed back to that sponsor will help. If I think of others, I'll continue to add them in. From Wayne, refreshing to see a broader perspective for applying the change process. Thank you. Most models portray a linear set of stages and steps. In reality, roles and responsibilities change during the journey, and we often fail to enable this flexibility and try to stick within a predetermined method. That's right. And I think that's one of the reasons where, like, at least in an agile cycle, it's a cycle. The agile methodology includes a cycle that you stay within until you really close that program off. And I agree with that comment there. And even these landmarks, they're not necessarily a method per se or an exact order necessarily, but they are a way of checking yourself and a way of asking yourself those questions as you go to help you stay on track and make sure that you're heading in the right direction. I'm going to try to, while any other questions are coming in, just going to continue to try to add this attachment in. Actually, can I ask you, Julie, if I have it in a file to attach, it's just what I was just showing there in PDF. If I need to, would I be able to send that out to people through you?
Yep. If you send it to me, I can attach it in the community. People can grab it there.
Oh, okay. Let's do that then.
Yep.
So if everyone who's joined, if you don't mind, I thought I could just quickly attach it here, but I feel like it's taking a bit of maneuvering. You mentioned at the beginning that the topic of different workplace structures. Oh, would you want? Yeah, sure. Okay. So the question is elaborating on different workforce structures. Yes. So one of the other hallmarks of the future of work is around your employees and whether they're going to be, if you will, on or off balance sheet. It's the incorporating of freelance workers, as well as your contractors, as well as your permanent employees. What that means, though, is that the way that you're going to design your workforce structure is going to change as part of the future of work. Let me just speak a little bit more about that. You'd want to start from a position of thinking about what are the jobs that need to be done. And why that's a question that you'd be asking is because you'd be looking at having some of that work automated. And you'd be looking at having some of that work only partially automated. So you've got that pairing of artificial intelligence and human intelligence, i.e. the algorithms and the people. Okay. And then you might say, well, gosh, when I'm looking at that, I have some that, roles that make sense to continue to be permanent roles, but I have some that can be done in that contracting space, in that freelancing space. So the whole workforce structure starts to change. And that is, so that's another, I guess, hallmark of the definition of the future of work. I haven't missed anything here.
I think that whole space is really fascinating, particularly when you then start to overlay the other landmarks that you talked about. Like you're not just changing people that work for you, you're changing people that are maybe upstream or downstream from you in terms of your suppliers. You're talking about, that you may be changing, you got freelancers in that support your business. What does the change look like for them when it's not a traditional hierarchical organized structure?
It's not likely to be. And did I miss one there? So much hangs on ongoing I'm sorry, I have to lean over so far. I really should think about having this chat set up a bit better. Hangs on ongoing updating and onboarding new folks after the change that is frequently missed. Oh yeah. So great point there, because in fact, we call it reboarding, not just onboarding, because you don't just onboard your new employees anymore. You actually have to reboard your current employees, and you go through that process of reintroducing not only the work place, depending on what that is, but the expectations. And a lot of the times, well, we're seeing a really big focus anyway, and the majority of it, if we're doing it well, that includes a huge culture piece. And we're talking about, onboarding may have always included a little bit of culture, but when you're reboarding, you're actually talking about the culture that people haven't experienced before, which I appreciate goes against the definition of culture, because it's, the way we do things around here. But it's about starting to have those conversations in that process. Yeah, so great comment there. Thank you. Sorry, put your hand up if I missed anything. Oh, no, I think we're okay.
I think if I could go back to any point in time, actually, there'd be 2 points in time. One would be when the project management community, and I say this with love because they are part of my community, where they decided to call the sponsor a governance role. Whereas the amount of conversations I have is like, yes, it's a component of sponsorship, but it's not the main reason why people are there. Yeah. And the second is the day that change management was turned into a process.
I know.
To Wayne's point, that's something that you can delegate as opposed to leading yourself. What I love about VID is that I get the opportunity to meet people that I've never met before. And Temre, I put you in that category this year, and it's been an absolute privilege to hear you speak and to be on the stage rather than in the stands. And I want to thank you for your participation as an attendee this year, but also to acknowledge what a great session that was. I could sit and talk about these 11 landmarks all day.
Oh, thank you. That means a lot to me. Thank you.
Many battle scars. I was just look. I've got so many stories from where one or many of these have been missing in transformation. Arlene said, psychologically safe environment. Can you expand on some great ones you've seen or been part of?
Sure, thank you. I guess, can I expand on some great ones that you've seen or been a part of? I have seen and been a part of psychologically safe environments, but they happen to be in smaller teams. So I guess I can also speak from that experience of not seeing the boundaries expand into the broader transformation program. So I've actually started looking into psychological safety a bit more and assessing it and measuring it. It doesn't have to be necessarily the first thing you do before transformation, but it is a really interesting diagnostic to run in advance before a transformation, because you might be able to, I don't know if fix is the right word. Let's just say you might be able to respond to some of those underlying issues before attempting to change that environment. And when we're talking about things like, a lot of people are talking about the remote environments, and maybe that's a bit easier to refer to, but you want to be able to have an environment where you don't lose that connectivity and you are still safe to speak up and you are still safe to challenge the status quo. So hence I'm saying it's a good thing to measure beforehand. And what you're looking for in those psychologically safe environments is that you're comfortable taking risks, you're comfortable speaking up. We talk a lot about the leadership influence in that space. And when you get into programs where you try to say, look, I think that this is something at risk. I think we're not going to make this. I've seen this in the product space as well. They're not going to make the go live date. The product's going to have a defect. When you are put down or pushed aside for pointing those things out, you don't have a psychologically safe environment. And what happens is it gets quieter and quieter. And anytime you're ending a stand-up and no one's got anything else to say, it's probably a pretty good sign that there is some level of fear going on there. Look, well, I don't know if you wanted me to go into another example. While I haven't personally worked at Google, I can just share a couple. They've created a psychologically safe environment that they talk a lot about in their onboarding process. The second thing is that they ran a lot of research and have shared the outcomes of that research and found that psychological safety was one of the most, in fact, yeah, by far the most important factor in team effectiveness. And that's what is required here, an effective team to deliver this kind of change. So what I'll do, Julia, as well, I'm happy to share a link to that research. I have the original link, but I've also written about it in the past. So I'll pass that on to this group as well. What's some common adoption measures that you've seen and used across transformation programs? So I have a, thank you, Joe. That's such a huge question, actually. I almost want to say, let me chat with you for half an hour afterwards. Let me just start by saying maybe just some principles really around measuring adoption. If you're running that kind of agile cycle, you're going to have hopefully some smaller drops, or, you know, again, this goes into how serious you take agile, but a sprint, the end of a sprint is that you have a shippable product. All right, so you should have something that you could test with your users, right? So you're immediately you're checking that, okay? And so that's one of the first principles is adoption doesn't have to necessarily come at the finished product. You could be tracking it along the way. The second principle that I'd add into that is that you have a go live adoption target. So what would you expect to see in the first 5 to 7 days of a launch? And now, sorry, the example that's coming to my mind here is more of a product example, but you know, what's the adoption rate at the beginning? But you really want to say, but I need to know, when is that adoption curve coming into the mainstream? When would I expect the majority of users to have done what I expect them to do? And that's a different point in time, and again, a different metric. And if I go back to, I'm just thinking about some of the other ones as well. So yeah, thanks. The adoption targets, but there's also benefits attached to them. And that is particularly important if you're talking about something that you're rolling out to your employees, your customers. Sure, a lot of people used it, but does that mean they downloaded the app? Or does that mean that they bought something? But what was the benefit? Did they actually use it? It's kind of like saying, if you got everyone to start working from home, okay, great, we got a 95% adoption rate on everyone working from home. But what was the benefit that I was trying to instill there? Was I trying to improve their work environment? Was I trying to help them to feel connected? So those two need to be paired together. Hopefully that's kind of some principles. And then if you'd like, happy to connect on actual metrics I've used. I'd pull out some old notes.